Good evening, everybody. And we'll begin our Dhamma talk evening chanting the refuges and the precepts together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. Panatipata veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Abrakmacharya veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Musawada veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Sura meraya majapamadhatana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Vikala bhojana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Nacha gita vadita visukadasana malaganda vilepana dharana mandana vipusanatana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Uchasayana Mahasayana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Idam me silam maga palanyana sa pachayo otu. This evening will be, it'll be morning for a few people who are sleeping right now. But this evening for all of us, we'll be exploring equanimity, the balance and the equipoise of the heart, the mind, living with the heart of greatness, even in times of stress and uncertainty and turbulence. And we'll begin with a few moments as though we're all sitting under the Bodhi tree with the Bodhisattva, this just about to be Buddha, on that now famous night, as he was protected within the great strength of his mindful presence, So settle in. And using the great power of our mind, as though we're sitting under the Bodhi tree with the about to be Buddha. With him being protected within the great strength of his mindful presence, which was enlivened by a keen interest and a penetrating sense of investigation, exploration, accompanied by clear discernment. This about to be Buddha, supported by the tremendous energy of his determination and the flow of an effortless effort, imbued with an enlivening and refreshing joy, balanced within the deep power and cool ease of an unwavering and undistracted mind. Siddhartha Gautama sitting under the bo tree that night with unshakable stability, with an evenness and balance of receptive, open-hearted presence, as though he were an immovable mountain, the mountain of equanimity. Here in Taos, New Mexico, where I live, we have what is considered to be a sacred mountain. It's one amongst many mountains that surround the Taos Valley. The sacred mountain is actually within the Taos Pueblo, the village of the Tiwa Indians that sits at the north edge of the town of Taos. This particular mountain is sacred to the Tiwa people, and it's also a sacred symbol for many Taoseños. I have the great good fortune to be able to look out at it and to take it in every season, any time of the day or night or any day of the year, as it's very clearly visible from where I live. This mountain, any mountain, just simply sits where it is. The sun shines on it, rain falls on it, hail falls on it, snow covers it sometimes, lightning sometimes strikes it, fires occasionally rage on it. All sorts of life forms are born and die on it, living out their particular patterns on and with the mountain. The mountain remains unshakable, unwavering. The mountain of radical acceptance, the mountain of impartiality, the mountain of equanimity. And the mountain itself is a live energy, a lively energy, but only exists in relationship to all of the myriad, lively, constantly changing energies that constitute it. The mountain appropriately sustains and supports the activity that it's intricately and intimately connected to. And yet, the mountain of equanimity doesn't cling on, isn't attached or averse to anything. We could say that it lets life live through it, closing off to nothing, and holding on to nothing. And all of this happens with the amazing grace of impartiality and balance. And so begins our exploration of Upekkha, equanimity. Upekkha is a very powerful force in our practice, a powerful force in the whole of our life. In the Buddha's teachings, it's included as one of the 10 paramis, or the 10 perfections, to be cultivated through our years of practice. And it's one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 divine abidings: metta, karuna, compassion; mudita, appreciative or empathetic joy; and here we are now with the 4th one, upekkha, equanimity. It's also one of the 7 factors of awakening. Those are mindfulness, investigation, effort or energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Upekkha is also one of the 2 jhana factors, the absorption states of concentration that are present in the 4th jhana, with these 2 jhana factors in the 4th jhana being ekaggata, which it translates as one-pointedness, and the second being equanimity. Upekkha was the final factor to come into maturity before Siddhartha Gautama attained full awakening. As this about to be Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, as we kind of just sat with him, with an evenness and balance in his relaxed and very powerful presence, with the amazing grace of impartiality and balance, seeing things very clearly and relinquishing, letting go, relinquishing every attachment to all formations of body and mind, and then breaking through to the great awakening, breaking through to the complete ending of suffering. Upekkha, in its maturity, is the factor or the quality of mind and heart that is manifest before one comes to realize the Dhamma, meaning before one enters the stream or stream entry, which is the first stage of awakening. The Buddha described what he called 6-limbed equanimity. So what does this mean? 6-limbed equanimity. It means equanimity in relationship to what comes in at each of the 6 sense doors: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and the mind door. This 6-limbed equanimity was described as the equanimity of one whose afflictive states, or as the Buddha sometimes called them, cankers, have been destroyed. Destroyed temporarily, as happens in the deep concentration of jhana, or destroyed completely, finally, totally destroyed, as occurs in the final completion of vipassana practice. And then who abides in the natural state of purity in relationship to the desirable or undesirable objects that come into focus at any of the 6 sense doors. And some words from the Buddha. Here, a bhikkhu, a yogi, a meditator, whose cankers are destroyed, is neither overjoyed nor distraught on seeing a visible object with the eye, hearing an audible sound with the ear, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. She, he, they dwells in equanimity, mindfully and fully aware. Equanimity is the fearlessness, the great strength and ease of the mind, the heart, to remain centered and unmoved in the midst of it all. The literal translation from the Pali word equanimity is on-looking. Equanimity looks on at the occurrence of physical and mental pleasure and pain by maintaining a neutral mode, by staying in the middle, staying in the center, watching things as they arise and as they change and as they pass. On looking, it sees them fairly, we could say, meaning without favoritism, without bias, without partiality. So one attribute of equanimity itself, as it's described in the realm of Vedana, in the realm of feeling, is as neither painful nor pleasant feeling, neutral feeling. We could say that equanimity is the equipoise, the balance or the equilibrium between the opposing forces in the mind of the desired and the undesired. This equipoise of equanimity offsets the weightiness of greed and the weightiness of aversion. It's that point of balance in the middle of the seesaw of life. The mind, the heart doesn't move towards, nor does it move away. I remember as a child that I really loved to find that point of balance when I was playing on the seesaw or the teeter-totter, as we called it, with another child. With both of us being suspended in our seesaw seat, our teeter-totter seat, perfectly balanced in mid-air. Maybe some of you had that experience. For me, there was always a certain kind of happy and almost a breathtaking feeling inside me in the moments when this would occur. The poet T.S. Eliot said it very beautifully. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point, there the dance is. But neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity. Where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. This still point of equanimity is a place of protection, while at the same time being an experience of great spaciousness and great strength of mind and heart. The Buddha used the metaphor of putting a teaspoon of salt into a cup of water. Because of the small container, of course, the water will be extremely salty, harsh, and not drinkable. On the other hand, if we put a spoonful of salt into a large body of water, the size of the Rio Grande River, which is the largest river here in New Mexico, it certainly won't have the same effect because of the enormous amount of water, because of the great wateriness, we could say, or the great spaciousness that the salt is put into. And of course, as we all know, life is quite salty at times. It's how it is. One aspect of the development of equanimity is about creating the spaciousness of mind and heart with which we can meet and look on at all of life's everyday experiences, as well as all of the subtleties of the internal and external phenomena that we come to see and know through our practice. To look on with balance, with equipoise, with the heart of greatness, with what is called in the suttas in relationship to equanimity as a factor of enlightenment, to look on with specific neutrality. So what does this mean? Specific neutrality. It means that whatever states of consciousness are present, including the three other immeasurables, the three other divine abidings, metta, karuna, and mudita, including the various wholesome and beautiful states that are developed with concentration and mindfulness, including the other 6 enlightenment factors, including all the potentially difficult states of mind that show up in our mind and heart. Specific neutrality means that any and all of these states are met, experienced, and known, looked on at evenly through the mind of equanimity. So the function of equanimity is to inhibit partiality. And this means that Upekkha, or equanimity, manifests as neutrality. And if we're realistic about this, which we're trying to be, it takes a lot of practice to get there. There's a wonderful little book of teachings from Zen Master Dogen with commentary by Uchiyama Roshi, and the book is called How to Cook Your Life, where Dogen uses the work of the monastery cook, the tenzo, and our relationship to food to teach us, in this case, to teach us about equanimity. We can bring this teaching immediately close, right here and now, in relationship to the food, for instance, that you're eating on this online retreat. Whether you are preparing your own food or whether someone else is preparing food for you. And these are some words from Dogen in this book, How to Cook Your Life. Handle even a single leaf of a green in such a way that it manifests the body of the Buddha. This in turn allows the Buddha to manifest through the leaf. This is a power you cannot grasp with your rational mind. It operates freely according to the situation in a most natural way. At the same time, this power functions in our lives to clarify and settle activities and is beneficial to all living beings. And Dogen goes on. A dish is not necessarily superior because you've prepared it with choice ingredients, nor is a soup inferior because you've made it with ordinary greens. When handling and selecting greens, do so wholeheartedly with a pure mind and without trying to evaluate their quality in the same way in which you would prepare a splendid feast. And he's continuing here. In practicing the Dhamma, delicious and ordinary tastes are the same, not two. There's an old saying, the mouth of a monk, the mouth of a yogi, is like an oven. And we're still here with Dogen's words. Just as an oven burns both sandalwood for incense and dried cow dung, in Dogen's time, of course, there was no natural gas or propane or electricity. So I'll read that again. Just as an oven burns both sandalwood for incense and dried cow dung for cooking, without distinctions, our mouths should be the same. There should be no distinction between delicious food and food which is plain and simple. We should be satisfied with whatever we receive. So, how does one look on at the mind with equanimity? What contributes to this looking on in this way? What contributes to this capacity of relating to all things with equanimity? A simple example in relationship to our practice. So we're sitting, and we find that the mind it's tranquil, serene. And this is being experienced and being known. And we recognize that the focusing power of the mind, concentration, is evenly and repeatedly connecting with whatever the object of our attention is. For instance, the breath at the Anapanasati. The mind isn't listless, nor is it agitated, but rather it's interested and appropriately energized. And all of this is being experienced, and mindfulness knows. At those times, there isn't really any interest or necessity for exerting or restraining or encouraging the mind in any way. You've all had at least moments of these kinds of experiences. With our practice, just simply and clearly recognizing and knowing without any attachment, very important, without any attachment, that this is what's occurring, that these factors of mind are in place for a brief or maybe for a longer period of time, is actually something that contributes to the blossoming of the state, or the blossoming of the factor of mind of equanimity. Consequently, it contributes to our capacity to relate to all things, to relate to all phenomena with equipoise and composure. During the time of the Buddha used a metaphor for the mind when it's in this mode, and this is the metaphor that he shared. One is like a charioteer who looks with equanimity on horses progressing evenly. Well, that's not the way most of us travel. So in our case, the metaphor might be, one is maybe like the driver of a car who looks on with equanimity in a car that's running along evenly when it's set on cruise control. If that's still in cars, I'm not even sure. It used to be. We could set our car on cruise control. And so we're able to see, we're able to know, we're able to take in what's in front of us and what's passing by with some ease, with some equanimity. This quality, this factor of mind allows the process of practice, the development of mindfulness and metta to unfold without getting caught, without getting mired in the habits of mind that can stop things up, such as the various habits of clinging and attachment and identification that create a block, that create a tangle, we could say, in the flow of the process of our practice. Within the ambiance of equanimity, even the subtlety of the habits of attachment, identification, and aversion, and the comparing mind can be seen, can be known, and let go of, allowing mindfulness, concentration, metta, and understanding to blossom, to deepen, and eventually to mature. As we practice, we begin to taste equanimity, along with the arising of other wholesome states accompanying it, such as patience and confidence, and of course, metta. And as each of you know, we all know that until equanimity is really fully blossoming and really truly matured, we lose and we regain our balance over and over and over again. This is how we learn. Quite a number of years ago, for the whole of the last 2 weeks of a very long retreat that I was sitting, I practiced equanimity for those last 2 weeks, day in and day out continuously, in the way that it's practiced as a Brahmavihara, as it's practiced as one of the sublime abidings, as we're doing here in this retreat, by silently repeating one equanimity phrase over and over and over and over again, and over and over and over and over again. First directing it to myself, and then on through all the same categories that we use for metta practice. And the phrase that I used was, I am the heir of my karma, meaning I am the heir of all of my deeds, all of my actions of mind, speech, and body. I am the heir of my karma. My happiness or suffering depends upon my actions, not upon my wishes for myself. I said that phrase thousands and thousands of times over those 2 weeks. For myself and in relationship to many other beings. And by the end of those 2 weeks, there was quite a deep and quiet sense of balance and evenness and neutrality in the heart and mind. A day or two before the end of the retreat, the thought came up, well, there's quite a lot of equanimity here. Seems to be a fairly deep an abiding equanimity. And the next thought that came was, well, I wonder if there's an equanimity test. If this was a Zen session or a Zen retreat, any good Zen teacher would do something creatively startling to check my equanimity. But this is a Vipassana retreat, and Vipassana teachers, they just don't do things like that. And then that thought or those thoughts just disappeared. Well, later that day, I was startled. I was startled in true Vipassana fashion, we could say, an equanimity test Vipassana style. I got a note from one of my equanimity teachers, though the note was actually from all 5 of the teachers that were teaching that retreat. And it said, we would like you to give the Dhamma talk. We would like you to give the generosity talk to the yogis tomorrow. Well, at that point, I was not teaching the Dhamma. I had no interest, no ambition, no wish to teach the Dhamma. That note was shocking to me, so to say. And for a moment, equanimity flew right out the window of my heart and my mind. And it felt like my heart stopped. And in through the window flew my old habit of fear. I can't do this. I cannot do this now, said my old habit. I've been silent and sitting here for so many weeks, deeply, deeply into practice. I cannot get up in front of all my fellow yogis and speak. It's completely and totally impossible. I can't do it. And then the heart and the mind relaxed and clearly saw what had just occurred. And the thought came in, yes, this is my equanimity test, of course. And I can do it. And I want to do it. And at that moment, with that shift in the mind and the heart, a tremendous flood of gratitude came into the mind and heart. Gratitude for the teachers, gratitude for the retreat center staff, gratitude for the Buddha, for the teachings, for the practice. And just as suddenly as it had gone, equanimity was back. What I was being asked to do felt like the most natural thing in the world to be doing. Until Upekkha has matured, we lose and we regain our balance and equipoise, the equipoise and balance of equanimity over and over and over again. Equanimity manifests as quieting fear, quieting boredom, dislike, resentment, quieting the self-judgment that can manifest as guilt or disapproval, self-doubt, not being good enough. It also manifests as quieting liking and pride and attachment and the judgment of approval in relationship to what we think of as ourself, as me, as my experiences. Equanimity also manifests in quieting the attachment and fear, the various aversive states that might come up in relationship to others. Along the way of our practice, when equanimity has arisen and it's developing, in those moments, fear and resentment, attachment, identification, and the judgments of approval or disapproval, they subside. Within the clear space of a momentary or maybe longer true neutrality, there's absolutely nothing for greed and aversion to stick to. If they start to poke their nose up, they start to arise. Equanimity fails when it produces what's called the equanimity of unknowing. And the Buddha called this worldly-minded indifference produced by ignorance. That's kind of a mouthful. So what does it mean? Worldly-minded indifference produced by ignorance. It occurs when we don't clearly see or don't clearly see through the object of our attention with the focused attention of a mindful, concentrated mind, heart, rooted in metta, rooted in kind-heartedness. But instead are blindly seduced by and swept away in the happenings of life, which includes some of the inner experiences that happen within our meditation practice. Seemingly, and I'll repeat that word, seemingly equanimous with it all. This is not upekkha. It's what the Buddha called indifference based in or produced by ignorance. And some words from the Buddha. On seeing a visible object with the eye, or in relationship to contact through any of the 6 sense doors, equanimity arises in the foolish, infatuated, ordinary man or woman, in the untaught, ordinary woman or man who hasn't seen or conquered his or her limitations, who hasn't understood or conquered future results, meaning karma, who is unperceiving of danger in relationship to attachment, in relationship to the danger of aversion. Such equanimity doesn't see through the visible object or any of the objects that show up through any of the 6 sense doors. Such so-called equanimity is actually worldly-minded indifference based in ignorance. The Buddha was, I say wonderfully, sometimes it might not have felt so wonderful to get these messages from him, but he was wonderfully direct, extremely straightforward, and very succinct in his teaching. And that was, to me, that's a really good example of that. So, a personal story as an example, or hopefully a useful teaching story. When I first began living here in Taos, I was really aware of how many beautiful handcrafted things there were in the shop windows, in the store windows. And at times I would get very infatuated with what I was seeing. And sometimes I would get caught in the delusion of needing what I was seeing. That very painful contraction of the must-have mind. We all know that. I must have that. Well, I decided to do a practice with this because it was not comfortable at all. So over time, I did a practice. I would walk along in town and look in all of the shop windows, observing the process of my mind and heart, very carefully and closely, noticing what would happen as I would observe all these beautiful things in the shop windows. It took quite a while, actually, but eventually I was able to walk along and look in the shop windows and just appreciate the beauty of what I was seeing, with great appreciation for the amazing creative capacities of the human beings that made all of the objects that I was looking at, without the feeling of the deluded feeling of thinking I needed what I was looking at. It was a great relief, really a huge relief. And fortunately, it's persisted, because I still live in Taos and still look in the window sometimes. The Dalai Lama tells a story about being taken to a particular area in London by a friend. And as they walked along in this particular area, they passed all these various shops. And this friend took him here on purpose. All these various shops that sell all kinds of tiny mechanical parts, which is of a particular interest and fascination of the Dalai Lamas. And he said that he found himself having some very strong inner feelings of wanting them all, he said. And then he said, all of a sudden, he realized that he didn't even know what any of them were for. That cut the wanting. I mean, he's practiced a lot, so it didn't take a whole lot to cut it, but that did it, he said. And I'm sure that every one of us has experienced the pretense, we could say, of equanimity within ourselves, maybe in the midst even of greed or dislike or boredom or resentment or anger or fear or disappointment, or in the midst of attraction and desire. So what do I mean by this? The pretense of equanimity. Well, it means the glossing over, the ignorance or the ignoring of these states. It means the pretending to ourselves, the pretense of equanimity, the, well, it's all just fine, that attitude. It's all just fine. Or the attitude of, it really doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. And sometimes these pretense of equanimity thoughts are accompanied by a slight or maybe not so slight moving away from, a contraction within the body, heart, and mind. Or maybe an inner sense of moving towards with a grasping kind of quality in the heart and mind that we may not be aware of. That's the pretense of equanimity. It's, of course, not equanimity. It's indifference. Indifference based in ignorance, which is rooted in delusion. And it's called the near enemy of equanimity. Indifference, I call it indifference masquerading as equanimity, as upekkha. And of course, every single one of us know from our own direct experience that when we're inflamed with greed, dislike, fear, grief, extreme sadness, resentment, it's extremely difficult, or it just isn't even possible at times to look on at those moments with a true equanimity. Upekkha is based on an attentive, clear presence of mind, not on dullness or not at all on indifference. It's also not a kind of casual passing mood, and it's definitely not produced by exertion. It's one of the fruits, it's one of the results of our practice. The fruit of training the mind, training the heart, through the development and the blossoming of the factors of mindfulness, concentration, investigation, metta, a balanced effort joy, tranquility, and compassion. A true equanimity is able to meet all of the vicissitudes of life, meaning all of the flip-flops of life that we encounter in our mind in relationship to what are classically called the 8 worldly winds. The 8 worldly winds being praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame or distinction, disrepute, disrespect, or disregard, all of which come our way throughout our life at times. True equanimity is able to meet these sometimes harsh feeling evaluations and criticisms and experiences that inevitably come our way. And equanimity is actually quickly able to regenerate its strength once our practice has moved along from our inner resources, the resources that have been developed through our diligent practice. And again, from the Buddha. Develop the mind of equilibrium. You will always be getting praise and blame. But do not let either affect the poise of the mind. Follow the calmness. Follow the absence of pride. There's an amazing practice that I've been told was, and maybe is still very occasionally practiced by the Hopi Indians. I do not recommend this practice, but we can take it as a metaphor for us in relationship to the cultivation and the manifestation of the power of fearlessness, even-minded heart and mind, and the protection that is one of the great strengths of equanimity. And what I will share with you next comes from the book of the Hopi by Frank Waters, The Way of the Hopi. There were all kinds of snakes. Rattlesnakes, big bull snakes, racers, sidewinders, gopher snakes, about 60, all tangled on the floor. The singing stirred them. They moved in one direction, then another, looking over all the men in the circle. The men never moved. They just kept singing with a kind expression on their faces. The snakes began to roll in the sand, taking their bath. Then a big yellow rattler moved slowly towards an old man singing with his eyes closed, climbed up his crossed leg, coiled in front of his breechcloth, and went to sleep. Pretty soon this old man had 5 or 6 snakes crawling over his body, raising their heads to look at his closed eyes and peaceful face, then going to sleep. They showed they had found their friend looking within the heart of this one upon whose body they chose to rest. This is the way snakes show who are good and kind men with pure hearts. True equanimity will possess the power of protection and also a wholesome resistance in relationship to the mind, the heart getting seduced by and caught into states of fear, greed, aversion. And equanimity also possesses the power of renewing itself, as I mentioned very briefly a little bit ago. But only if it's deeply rooted in a growing insight, a growing understanding into the true nature of things. There are two particular insights or two particular understandings that I'd like to spend just a little time exploring with you this evening, in that as they develop along the way of our practice and eventually ripen, are the root of equanimity. And the first of these is our growing clarity in the understanding of how the vicissitudes, how the ups and downs, how the 8 worldly winds of life originate, how they come to be. And this is the understanding of kamma or karma. So what does this mean? The understanding of karma as one of the roots of equanimity. The understanding that the various experiences of stress, suffering, and the experiences of ease are the result of our kamma, meaning the result of our actions of thought, speech, and deed, right here and now in this very lifetime, and on back and back and back. This is our kamma. We can say that we're born, that we spring out of the womb of kamma. And even though we may or we may not like it at times, we are undeniably the heirs of our kamma. So for instance, a very ordinary, everyday experience for all of us. Just as soon as we've spoken words, just as soon as we've performed any action, we've totally lost control over it. And yet it remains with us. And in some way, it inevitably returns to us as our due inheritance. The truth of the way of things is that everything that happens and the ease or dis-ease in our mind and heart is the outcome of our own mind's relationship to all of the happenings in life, internally and externally. So in other words, our suffering and our happiness in this life, in any given moment, is due to our own mind, our motivations, and our responses or reactions to phenomena, not due to our hopes and not due to our wishes for ourselves, and not due to some other person or some outer antagonistic or seemingly strange or foreign world. As this understanding, and it's not an easy one, but as this understanding takes root in us, it actually has the power to free us from fear. And so it's one of the roots of equanimity. You might remember, although it seems like it was years ago when I offered the Dhamma talk, but it wasn't, it was just last week. You might remember George Dawson, the African-American man, and his response to the woman who left food for him on the porch up on the shelf. And he didn't eat it. And then she asked him why. And he told her. And he stayed even, balanced, equanimous, and truthful in his response to her. That's equanimity. When we begin to see that we only meet ourselves, we only meet our own mind in relationship to everything that happens around us and within us. What is there to fear? This then is an opening, is an opportunity for the heart, the mind, to begin to relax. And we begin to know that we can change our mind. That we, in fact, are not trapped on the karmic wheel, running around and around and around. This is our possibility, this change of the heart and mind. But of course, as every one of us have experienced, fear, uncertainty, and insecurity arise along the way. And at the same time, as we traverse this path, we clearly begin to see and we begin to know that the refuge where fear can be dispelled is through our good deeds. Refuge from this particular perspective is in wholesome motivations, wholesome intentions, wholesome thought, wholesome words, and performing wholesome actions. As we take this refuge, there comes to be a growing confidence in the great protecting power of good deeds that we've done in the past, and a growing courage to perform more and more wholesome deeds right now, even in the midst of what might seem to be some hardship in our current life. And of course, our practice, this incredible training of the mind and heart that we're engaged in, is a very, very good deed. It's really the best. And it's the essential ground for the blossoming of wholesomeness through all aspects of our life. One of the things that's been really important to me in understanding karma or kama is that it's always the right time to perform wholesome actions. It's always the right time to do good deeds. It's never too late. Maybe some of us have been told that, oh, too bad. Just that's too bad. It's too late. Too late. Sorry. Or maybe we've heard, oh, an old dog can't learn new tricks, and we've taken it on. But it's never too late, really, never. And so we practice this, and it becomes established in us. And it becomes a refuge. And at some point we know for sure, as was said by one of the Buddha's disciples, more and more ceases the misery and evil rooted in the past. And this present life, I try to make it spotless and pure. What else then can the future bring other than an increase of the good? As this becomes more and more a certainty in our mind and our heart, the mind definitely becomes more tranquil and more serene, and equanimity is more available. As we engage, or as we take and engage in this refuge, we gain the great strength of the evenness, balance, and patience of the heart of equanimity in relationship to the various challenges and the various difficulties in our practice and in our life as a whole. Along the way of our practice, with the development and the blossoming of relative equanimity, we find that we have the strength to endure when we need to endure. And we begin to see clearly when that's called for. We have the possibility of not continuing to blindly fall into the same holes over and over and over again, but we begin to walk down a different street, we could say. The understanding of Kamma can imbue us with a very powerful motivation to free ourselves from Kamma, to free ourselves from the actions that again and again and again throw us into repeated suffering. As we more and more clearly see our own craving and delusion, our habitual tendencies to create and engage in situations that strain and sap our strength and sap our healthy resistance, a wholesome disgust, as the Buddha called it, begins to arise. A wholesome disgust. There is such a thing. And our motivation to practice in order to free ourselves from craving and delusion is strengthened. The fruit of deliverance, of a deep and clear experience and understanding of equanimity, is the escape from greed. The Pali word is tanha, and the literal translation of tanha is the escape from insatiable thirst. So the first insight, the first understanding that's the basis of equanimity is a growing understanding of Kamma. The second insight that equanimity is based on is the teaching and understanding of anatta, not self. I hope you're patient. This is a long talk. There's still more, and I do want to offer it all. So maybe you need a minute to relax again. If you need to, stand up, shake a little bit, relax your body. Yeah, shake, 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 shake. Some of you are shaking. Yes. Yeah, me too. So the second insight that equanimity is based on, we'll explore this just a little bit, is the teaching and the understanding of anatta, not self. From this perspective, there's no one, there's no self performing any deeds, nor do the results affect any self. The fact is, the truth is that it's the delusion, it's the wrong view of a separate, solid, static self, a separate me that creates suffering and that disturbs equanimity. If we claim ownership, meaning this is me, this is mine, this is who I am, the vicissitudes of life will always throw us into the realm of suffering. So, for instance, if this aspect of our personality, some particular quality of ours, is criticized or it's blamed, one thinks, I'm blamed, and equanimity is shaken. When we receive approval, when we receive praise for something that we've done, we think, I've been praised. I'm a success. Equanimity is again disturbed. If this or that work or some aspect of our practice that we've been engaged in doesn't succeed or isn't praised in the way that we want it to be, one might think, well, my work has failed. My practice has failed. My practice is no good. I have failed. And of course, equanimity is again shaken. If wealth or a loved one is lost, we might think, what's mine has gone, and equanimity is shaken. The unwavering mountain of equanimity is always, always shaken in the delusion with the identification of me, mine, I am. As understanding deepens, and the heart opens, there's an easing of the constrictive feelings and thoughts based in self-centeredness. Unshakable equanimity is established by giving up, relinquishing all possessive thoughts, the thoughts of mine. Of course, with that thought itself maybe being quite a daunting thought. And since it probably is quite a daunting thought, we begin with the small things, from which it's at least relatively easy to detach oneself, and then gradually work up to the possessions and the goals and the identifications that we may very tenaciously be clinging to. So an example, the first time that I taught at the Forest Refuge at the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts was for 2 months. And I was the first visiting teacher there. Well, 2 months was a while. I was there long enough to really, really settle in. And yet again and again and again, there was the awareness that the house that I was staying in wasn't mine. And it came about in small, simple, and sometimes kind of surprising ways. When I first got there, there wasn't any telephone in the house. So I lobbied for a phone, which at moments felt like it was for me. I wanted a phone. I needed a phone. And there was quite a degree of tension and stress in this. But in truth, the phone was for many, many others who would be using this house for many, many years to follow. At one point, I was told that it was okayed, that a phone would be put into the house. But when that would happen was unknown. Well, at that point, I just let go. Just let go. And there really were no more thoughts about it. And I relaxed, and I really, truly felt that it didn't matter if the phone arrived while I was staying in the house or not, because it clearly wasn't for me. It wasn't mine. At one point during this same 2 months, it was decided to purchase a rug for the living room. There wasn't one. So Jeannie, the housekeeper at the time, came over with the rug catalog for the two of us to decide which rug to order. It was clearly not going to be a rug for me. It wasn't my house. So we were choosing for anyone. We were choosing for everyone. And what I noticed was there was such a difference in the experience in the heart with this. There wasn't this subtle contraction of something being mine, something being for me. There was an openness, a spaciousness, no contraction, no clinging in the choosing. And it was way more fun to do it that way. So the small things at first that we might think are ours, and working up to giving up, letting go, relinquishing other stickier thoughts of self, beginning to relinquish the identification with some of the qualities that we're identified with as who we think we are, our personality, if you will. It's the thought, now this is important, it's the thought of these being who I am that we relinquish, the clinging thought of these being who I am that we give up, that we let go of. So beginning maybe with some small aspects of our personality, qualities of seeming minor importance, and very slowly, very gently, with metta, with care, through our practice, working up to letting go of identification. Practicing detachment is what I'm talking about in relationship to those emotions and aversions that we may regard as the very center of our being. And also letting go of identification with the fruits that arise from our meditation practice. Ajahn Sumedho, the former abbot of the Amaravati monastery in England, shares a really wonderful way of practicing with this this aspect of letting go. He said that when a particular habitual tendency of his shows up, and in this case, he was talking about the critical mind, he says to himself, oh, there's my personality. I thought that was just wonderful. Oh, there's my personality. Can our personality be impersonal? Can we relinquish our identity with this or that being who I am, being me, including maybe positive emotions and aversions? Positive emotions or aversions, I should say. And even maybe the specific gifts, as well as the wholesome and beautiful states that manifest through our practice. All or some of which we may identify or come to identify with as the center of our being. To whatever degree we abandon, to whatever degree we relinquish thoughts of mine, of me, of I am, to whatever degree we forsake thoughts of self, equanimity will enter the heart. When we realize, when we really, truly come to know anything as void of a self, in those moments, how could it cause us any agitation due to lust or clinging or hatred or fear or grief? Consequently, the teaching and the practice of anatta is a really important guide along the path to perfect equanimity, along the path to liberation. Equanimity, the unshakable balance of heart, of mind, as I've said, is rooted in insight. The first insight or the first understanding being that of kamma, and the second being anatta. Equanimity is also seated and grows along the way of samatha practice, along the way of concentration practice. And it blossoms in quite a profound way as the deeper states of concentration, jhana, occur, particularly when one accesses the fourth jhana. I'd like to offer you just a brief description of equanimity that manifests in the fourth jhana, as I think it can be helpful in pointing out the subtler place and power and process that a well-developed, pure equanimity holds in the unfolding and the blossoming of our practice. As one enters into and sustains mindful presence in the fourth jhana, one's breath stops, or at least there is absolutely no perception available of breathing. It's said that this is how one fully tranquilizes the bodily formation, or how the bodily formation is fully tranquilized. The experience of the fourth jhana is very subtle and muted, in that there isn't any activity happening in the mind and body. There's a very clear, very settled, and an extremely subtle and at the same time intense sense of a single line or point of a bright, very, very stable light. There's no movement or any inclination or interest for any activity in the mind in relationship to anything. There's just this. And it's perfect. Just enough. Nothing else is needed, nothing else is wanted. It's a quietly, very subtle, mindful presence of being. Again, just this, nothing else. The experience of centeredness and equanimity is strong, clear, and totally pervasive. With the attainment and maturation of the equanimity in the fourth jhana, sensuous desire for anything at all, is temporarily inhibited. And it can be considerably weakened over the long haul. The heart, the mind of specific neutrality, equanimity, isn't cold or heartless or dull. And it definitely does not manifest as an emotional emptiness, but manifests out of a fullness or a completeness of connection and understanding. At some point in your practice, equanimity may evolve from being relative equanimity to absolute equanimity. In the progress of insight, when equanimity is strong, fulfilled, and mature, concentration and insight occur coupled together, without either one exceeding the other, along with an imbalance with all of the other factors of awakening, with all of these occurring at that point with what has been called a single taste. The single taste of awakening, the single taste of liberation. Liberation from the cankers. Deliverance from suffering. And at that point, there is clear insight knowledge into the dangers of the afflictive emotions, into the dangers of what are often called the defilements, and clear insight knowledge into the advantages of purification. Insight or understanding at this point produces what the Buddha called a satisfiedness, a purifiedness, and a clarifiedness within one's heart and mind, which is manifesting due to one's capacity for onlooking equanimity. And the Buddha spoke about this as being absolute equanimity or unworldly or holy equanimity. And in the Buddha's words, just as all the streams of the world enter the great ocean and the waters of the sky rain into it, but not an increase or decrease of the great ocean is to be seen. Such is the nature of holy equanimity. The equanimity of an awakened one is unshakable because it's absolute. And it's absolute simply because it clings to nothing. This is our possibility. So we practice. We practice here in this retreat. We practice at home, in the midst of your daily life. This retreat's in the midst of our daily life as well, in a certain way. And we practice with sincerity and we practice with diligence. As awakening beings, we practice with aspiration, we practice with determination. And because of all of this, it's inevitable that concentration, mindfulness, metta, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, and all of the wholesome factors of mind and heart, as well as the liberating insights will sprout, blossom, and eventually, potentially mature within us. It's our karma, we could say. So I'd like to close the talk this evening with two short pieces that come from the Buddha, from the Udana, the inspired utterances of the Buddha. Whose mind stands like a mountain, steady, is not perturbed, unattached to things that arouse attachment, unangered by things that provoke anger. When his mind is cultivated thus, how can suffering come to her, come to him? And the second piece from the inspired utterances of the Buddha. For one who clings, motion exists, meaning the movement of the mind. For one who clings, motion exists. But for one who clings not, there is no motion. When no motion is, there is stillness. Where stillness is, there is no craving. Where no craving is, there is neither coming nor going. Where no coming nor going is, there is neither arising nor passing away. Where neither arising nor passing away is, there is neither this world nor a world beyond, nor any place between the two. This, in truth, is the end of suffering. And let's sit quietly together for just a moment or two. And thank you for listening to the Dhamma. And thank you for your practice. So I went quite a bit over time. Instead of 15 minutes to come back and sit together with Christina, and give yourselves a half an hour, 30 minutes, whatever time that might be, wherever you are, to stretch your body, maybe have a cup of tea, walk a bit, do some equanimity practice when you're moving, while you're walking, maybe while you're drinking tea, and then come back again for our last group sit for today. with Christina. And I will see you in the morning.